Hi, this is Chris Cornell of Soundgarden. Well, it depends on the perspective and what the memory is. Like some of it feels like 100 years, and some of it feels like, a couple years ago. Depends on what it is I'm thinking about. The songs always seem new, and I think that's maybe a good thing. Maybe that's a good sign. I'm not really sure. They always seem new, and of course, anything from Superunknown feels like later period Soundgarden to me. But that's also based on the first 15 songs we ever wrote. So going all the way back to 1984, 1994 should seem like later period, and it was a long journey, I think, to get there, and one where it would have been impossible to predict. We would have written those songs coming from where we came from as a band in that first few weeks where we were learning how to become songwriters as a band. It was interesting. It wasn't that he was specific. It was that he wanted to try things, none of which was working, really. So the simple approach of here are our songs and this is the band and this is what we sound like, and get that on tape as accurately as you can, and you got a record. It was sort of the opposite of that. It was like spending 2 days on a vocal sound for a song, and ultimately going through all of these different options of trying different mics and different preamps and multiple preamps and this and that. And then after 2 days of singing a song, he'd sort of give up and go back to just plugging the mic into the board the way you normally do it. And that was the problem, is that if what he was doing was actually creating something that sounded interesting or new or great, I think it would have been, we all would have probably been up for it. But it wasn't. It was just kind of taking us on these sort of meandering trips that didn't really do anything except for annoy everyone. So, that was, I think, one of the challenges of it. And what I imagine is why it was a good thing. It sort of, I think, brought us together as a band. It sort of forced us to take the reins away, pretty much, and deal with it ourselves. All the while he was kind of trying to be involved. So in my memory of it, there was a lot of us just having to take responsibility for what we were doing ourselves, and that was probably a good thing. I think that it was just kind of new hard rock, really. But I also always thought that it didn't really exist. There was no such genre, really, because I didn't think of Pearl Jam as grunge either, or the closest thing I could kind of come to was a handful of some of the sub pop bands in a certain moment. Mudhoney being like the chief one, where it's kind of okay. They had sort of the same length hair, and they were wearing velour shirts, and they Mardi Gras beat. Like they had a look. They cultivated this look, and they had a visual identity that was specific and was on purpose, and very fuzzy guitars and a very sort of old school FU garage rock attitude, and it was specific. It was easy to get. And that, I guess, is what stuck in my mind as grunge. And then all the other Seattle bands had, little ingredients of that. But it was more a way of tying in the geography without using the word Seattle or Northwest. And that was it. I think that when I look back at what we meant to everything, it was actually much bigger than Seattle. We were, I think, the first band that was on 120 Minutes and Headbangers Ball at the same time. And that was this moment where you could look at that and think, well, what does that mean? It means something, but we don't know what that is yet. And what it meant was commercial rock was going to change a lot. And it was going to include what was already included in college alternative indie music. Indie music was suddenly going to become the mainstream. And Soundgarden was the band, not just from Seattle, but the indie band that was out there kind of with the potential to do that before anyone else was. The other bands that I can think of that were doing the same thing were the Chili Peppers, Metallica, Jane's Addiction, all predating by several years what became that year of 1992, where suddenly it was Seattle, Seattle, Seattle. So we kind of helped open a door that everyone else walked through. And we suffered, I think, more from the backlash of what opening that door meant at first, which was, what is this indie band doing, signing a major label deal? Who would do that? Everyone made fun of it. Mudhoney made fun of it. Sonic Youth made fun of it. Both bands, of course, then signed with major labels. But there was this little bit of transition between, we have an audience, it's our audience, we know who they are, they buy our records from like mom and pop indie stores, they know where to find them. Now we're on a label that doesn't really know who our fans are or how to reach them. And for a couple of releases and a couple of years, we had to kind of get back in touch with how to get our music to people. And then I think the success of some of the bands that came after us, who walked through the door we opened, actually in turn helped us, because it blew so hugely wide open that then we could be kind of received as anything. The idea that Black Hole Sun, for example, could be an international pop hit is crazy to me. And I think that ultimately wouldn't have happened if bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam didn't have such huge commercial success. They wouldn't have tried it. They wouldn't have thought, in Oslo, let's play this on the radio. It's called Black Hole Sun. They never would have done it. I remember some sort of weird period of anxiety that I think had to do with that notion. Once it occurs to you that, wow, maybe we're not an indie band that's going to be driving around with a van and a U-Haul trailer our whole lives. Maybe this is going to become something else. And what is that? And what does it mean if you reach for that and you fail? Then you can't even be an indie band in a van with a U-Haul trailer. You're kind of finished. And what does it mean if that's a success? Are you happy as a band that plays hockey arenas and flies to shows? And is there an audience for that? All those things. Soundgarden was always encouraged by everyone that I can think of, most notably, I suppose, Jonathan Poneman of Sub Pop fame, where very early on, he was like the first person to me that planted that seed, that you guys will be the future of rock music. You guys will be playing huge places. You guys will be the ones on rock radio stations that kids listen to in their Camaros, kind of thing. And I'd never thought of that. Didn't make any sense to me. But once that was introduced to us, we heard that a lot. And I always felt fairly confident that that was probably true, that our audience was going to be bigger. And I didn't really know what that meant. And I think ultimately we may have been sort of the luckiest ones, because we never got a backlash after that. We were able to have, we could sell 5 million copies or 9 million copies of Superunknown worldwide, and no one was mad at us, like they didn't think of us as commercial sellouts, because we were doing it with relatively weird songs. And we also seemed to be able to have a certain amount of anonymity as well. Like there was a period of a few years where it was hard for us to walk down the street in Seattle, but for the most part, we had some anonymity. We were lucky. We were selling millions of records and were able to do it without people hating us. Yeah, I think there's I remember a pivotal moment on the freeway in L.A., and I don't know what rock station it was, but it was the commercial rock station, and it was right after Louder Than Love had come out, and the song Get on the Snake was on the radio. And the reason why it was this key moment is not is it just that it was a commercial rock station, and they were playing Get on the Snake, but it made sense. It sounded right coming out of the speakers. It sounded like, this isn't a mistake that some programmer stuck in and he got away with it until his boss gets mad at him. It worked. It sounded great. It sounded vital and fresh coming out of the speakers, but it also sounded like that's where commercial rock music should go, somewhere exciting and new and fresh. And that was the moment where I thought, okay, this is going to change. But it isn't going to be quick, and it wasn't. That was 1990, and it took it's because that song lived comfortably in that world, but was fresh and new and edgy, that the same people, whether it was MTV or radio programmers across the country, gave other bands a chance. They gave us a chance again, but they also gave Pearl Jam a chance or Nirvana a chance and put their songs on, put their videos on. I think another band you can't leave out of this is Guns N' Roses, and at that Appetite for Destruction moment, because that was a big eye-opener to the record companies, to radio programmers, to video show programmers worldwide. And I also think it's a very organic moment, an instant where an audience that was out there said to those programmers, to those stations, we like this. You guys have been getting it all wrong. We don't know what's wrong with you, but this is what we like. It's edgy, it's weird, it's crazy. It's not hair metal and colorful spandex. It wasn't that far from that, but by the same token, it was. And I think that got everyone's antennae up, thinking maybe we don't know what's going on. And it repeated itself with Nirvana. I remember friends that I had that worked at Geffen saying, we've projected that Nevermind is going to sell 200,000 copies. And when they said 200,000 copies, they said it in a way that made it sound like a lot, like 200,000 copies it's going to sell. And that was their high side. You knew that was their goal, where they're high-fiving, but they're all kind of worried that maybe that won't happen. And then 18 million copies later, you'd have to sit and scratch your head and think, everyone's trying to take credit for it, from A&R on up to the president of the record company, but they didn't have a clue. None of them knew. It was an audience that knew, that said, this is what we want. Now that can happen organically with viral YouTube and just people passing it around. But then you had to convince people to take a chance on playing your song. And we spent some time doing that. And we risked, the audience that we had created. I think it was a couple of steps up from deciding that I wanted to kind of be a little more autobiographical in my approach to song lyrics. And that started with Bad Motorfinger. And I remember Outshine being like the biggest moment of that, where I didn't really like what I was writing and thought it was stupid and thought I was going to be judged for it, and then noticed that lyrically that was like the biggest connection I'd ever gotten with fans as we would play it in front of people, even from the first time we played it before it was even released. And that gave me the confidence to believe that, this is a place that I can go. And then started to create something that I felt was new and different. 4th of July is a good example, where I'm, in a sense, in my own mind, describing something that happened to me, but if you read it, it doesn't look like a description of something that could have happened to someone. And maybe Black Hole Sun is kind of similar. So it's sort of, in a sense, exposing myself on an autobiographical level, while at the same time still creating this atmospheric universe that the listener can go into. And that was always really important to me. I think Soundgarden has been fairly successful in that, which is that what I think of as more the Pink Floyd approach to music, creating that atmosphere for the listener to escape into, because that was what I loved about music. There's the visceral side of it, the Stooges side, where a teenage boy can listen to it, or girl, and just get swept away by that energy. And I loved music like that, but I also loved, I wasn't so necessarily into the thought-provoking, confrontational side of political punk music. I wanted to be swept away, and I think Soundgarden did that, and I think Superunknown was a huge triumph in that direction to me. We really created this atmosphere, this alternate dimension that the listener could go into and stay there if they wanted, because it was not only was it detached in our own world, but it was also big enough and broad enough, because there's 16 songs. Some of them are like epic lengths, and and the subject matter is broad, and so many different moods and feels. And we didn't sit and have a discussion about trying to create that, but I think it's something that we all were really happy we did.